Hey everybody, this is the Treatment Free Beekeeping Podcast. Welcome back to another episode. I have today, really exciting, Alaskan beekeepers. Now, normally I would record the whole episode and then record this intro right afterwards so that I would know what I'm talking about. However, today I'm doing something new and exciting. I'm just going to start recording and then I'm going to call the guys and then it's all going to happen and you're going to hear the whole thing happen. So, if you like that sort of thing, this is how we make the sausage. If you don't, whatever. All right, let's call Tim.
Hello.
Tim, is that you?
Hey, is this Solomon?
Yes, it is.
How are you today?
Well, hang on, let's get your levels.
Okay.
Go ahead and say something.
It's a beautiful day in Alaska. It's like 70 degrees, I think.
Great.
Burning up. Just had a mild disaster where my neighbor got a bunch of bees in her hair. And so,
That sounds exciting.
yeah, for me, probably not for her, but you know, that's why I keep my hair short, man.
All right, let me see if I can get Nathan on the line.
I'm Nathan.
Oh. Thought you were Tim. Who's Tim?
Yeah. Tim Huffman. Tim's this, he's a little newer. Last year was his first year, but he got like 4 of his hives, I think, through the winter out of 6. So he's pretty stoked and pretty active on all the different forums and he's the vice president of our little bee club. I'm the one that you met at the symposium a couple years ago up here.
This is Tim.
Hey, Tim.
Hey, Solomon.
Can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
I can. Let me see if I can get Nathan on here.
Okay.
Nathan, you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Is Tim still there? Dead guy.
No.
Merge calls. There we go. All right. Do I have both of you?
Yes. I have Tim anyway.
Okay. There's Tim.
All right. Awesome. Well, I'm really excited. Let's just jump right into it. Make sure everything's coming through. Looks like it. I'm really excited about talking to Alaskan beekeepers because I've been told for years that Alaskan beekeeping, especially treatment-free beekeeping in Alaska, is totally and completely impossible. So I just want to get into like what you do first, and then a little later we'll move on to how you do it. So, who wants to start?
Nathan.
Sure. Yeah. So it's funny because I've been told the same thing for the last probably 10 years that not only treatment free, but just you can't get bees through the winter. And then over the last probably 4 or 5 years, I've been told over and over again that, you know, if you don't treat, you're not going to have bees in the spring. But I've got a lot of bees. I'm looking at bees right now, actually, that are some of them. We're a little bit behind compared to most years, but some of them are so big that I'm gonna have to split them before they start swarming on me, which is fine. That's perfect for me. But like last year, I got about 70% of my hives through the winter. Sometimes it's as low as 50 or 60%, and sometimes it's higher. But yeah, it's going good, and I've been doing this for almost 10 years. Tim just started last year, and I don't know exactly what his numbers are, but it was good. Tim, you want to jump in there, Tim?
Well, I went into the winter with 3 large colonies, and I guess because I didn't know you couldn't overwinter bees, they all made it just fine. I had 2 smaller colonies that didn't make it. Part of that was beekeeper error. I didn't have the space right for them. Some empty frames in there that I didn't know were empty. But I think mostly it was size. I just didn't have enough bees in those boxes.
And how many hives do you usually overwinter? Both of you. Well, Nathan.
I usually overwinter like 25 to 30.
Okay, so we're not just talking about a couple of hives in the backyard. You actually have a good number of hives.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had as many as 40, but something like that. But that was a little too much with running my businesses and everything.
And what is the source of your bees?
Package bees originally. You know, like this year I got 4 packages, but the other 19 hives I have are all overwintered hives or like a swarm that moved in at some point. I just found them yesterday, so. But yeah, originally it was from package bees.
Do you get many swarms up there?
If I do, I don't catch them. I've only caught maybe like 5 or 6 in the last 8 years that I've really been intense about beekeeping. Tim's probably caught as many as I have.
I got 1 last year in the cemetery of all places.
And I've heard that all the swarms that do happen are actually swarmed out package hives from the same year. Is that true?
Either that or overwintered colonies, but there has been a couple of colonies that were found in trees that appeared to be possibly multi-year hives by Keith Malone.
Yeah, Keith told me about some of those when I was up there as well.
But they haven't found bees they haven't found living hives. They have found evidence. You know, like a tree went down and there was comb that was old.
Well, there was bees in there too. There was bees in there too, but like the tree had fallen and it had been getting rained on and it broke. So there were some bees still in it, but it looked like it had taken a beating from the storm.
Well, let's now that we've proven it is possible. That was the number one priority. Let's sort of get into the normal realm of the podcast, and let's start with how you got into bees and what your sort of operation is today. Let's start with Nathan.
Okay, well, it was something that actually Keith Malone. I own a health food store, and Keith Malone would come in from time to time, and I had another guy I was buying honey from. And it's just, it was always something that intrigued me, you know, just the idea of kind of like gardening, you know, it's almost like you plant something and watch it grow. But I also had a hard time getting local honey that was clean and getting it consistently, that, you know, wasn't made on somebody's stovetop or something, or, you know, but that's how I got into it. And the first couple of years, I just kind of like more of a bee haver, you know, but the last 8 years, I've been pretty serious about it. And I was thinking about that driving over here. And I would say 8 years ago, or around 7 years ago, is when I kind of went from like doing honeybees or whatever to feeling like that's part of my identity and I'll always be a beekeeper. But I never had any idea of doing anything other than wanting to be able to be self-sufficient and sustain myself, which I'm still a little ways off from. I'm getting closer. But the idea of not overwintering never crossed my mind. And now it's actually kind of taken over quite a bit of my store too. And as far as like selling equipment and teaching classes and, you know, doing the bee club and all that stuff. So it's actually little by little taken over my life, you know. So,
do you sell any of your own products?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That, get up right here. Sorry about that. I had bees dive bombing me there. So, but yeah, I sell the beeswax and the honey. I was trapping pollen for a while, but it seemed to affect my overwintering success, so I stopped. I just didn't find it worth it to trap the pollen if it was going to affect how my bees did over the winter, and it certainly seemed to affect them. it seemed like most of the hives I would trap pollen from were not surviving the winter. So I stopped that about probably 4 seasons ago. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Just the honey and the beeswax these days.
And Tim, how about you? How'd you get into beekeeping?
Well, I've wanted bees ever since I studied them a little bit back in grade school. And I'm in my early 60s now, so it just took a long time to take. I had a friend of mine I told that to, and he said he'd always wanted to do bees as well, and finally decided that last year was going to be the year. And he's the perfect bee partner. He covers half of the expenses, and I get to do all of the beekeeping.
That sounds exciting.
I like it.
I got 2 packages last year. Installed them in mid-April. Built that pretty good. I split one in late June to get to 3, and I caught a swarm to get to 4, and I found some bees living in a 2-sided fence that had swarmed out of somebody's hive. So I got to 5, and then I tried to overwinter some what we call orphan bees, or these bees that these people who kill their bees every year after harvesting. And some folks, if you get them early enough, they've been able to nurse them through the winter, getting to build up a little bit in the fall and nurse them through the winter. So I had that one, but I ended up combining a couple. So I went into winter with 5 colonies, 3 large ones and 2 small ones. And the 3 large ones all came through with flying colors.
And just so people understand what exactly they're dealing with, what exactly you guys are dealing with up there, let's talk about the climate, because when I was up there, it was like the second or third week of January. It never got above like 20 degrees while I was there. There was 6 inches of snow on the ground. Yeah, I mean, it's Alaska, for crying out loud. We were having breakfast and the sun came up at like 11 in the morning. And the sun was up for like half an hour, and then it went behind a mountain and it like went down again. And then it went out from the mountain, it was up again. And that was a totally new experience for me. So why don't you guys tell me what it's like to live there year round?
Well, Tim's lived here a lot longer than I have, I think. I've been up here since 1983, but yeah, the summers are great. The summers are a lot like it would be down in Oregon or Washington. Like, I think it's 70 degrees right now. And of course, we go from that really, well, I guess I'll start in January. So in January, we've got depending on the latitude you're at, or longitude, I could be backwards. But anyways, depending on how close you are to the Arctic Circle, that basically dictates how much sunlight you have each day. So in January, I think it's like maybe 4 hours, 5 hours, something like that the sun's kind of up. But then it goes from that to gaining light every day until you hit the summer solstice, which is coming up in, I think, about 2 or 3 weeks. And then it's light for like probably 18, 20 hours a day, depending on where you're at. So we do get a pretty intense season, as far as the bees being able to gather lots of forage and all that and build up quickly. But depending on the year, like this year, I saw the first pollen coming in, I believe it was around the 20th of March, but then there's other years where it might not be until May. And then we have, kind of a race to get them built up as quickly as we can so that we can split them, to increase or replace what we lost over the winter, and also have them ready for the nectar flow, which is only usually 3 to 4 weeks, mostly in July. And then and when the nectar stops up here, it's almost instant. You go from all this fireweed and sweet clover and, whatever, different types of dandelions to almost nothing within a matter of a week or two. And then you've got a bunch of very aggressive, sometimes bees looking for food. And it's pretty crazy. And then it's just time to start doing your best to prep them for winter and not take too much of the honey or not take any honey, depending on how they did, so that they've got enough to last them that long winter, you know. But yeah, that's kind of a brief synopsis of it. But you know, and I still kind of consider myself fairly new or intermediate, you know. I'm still on my first decade, so I still have so much to learn, and a lot of it's unexplored, because when I started, really Keith Malone was the only guy I knew that was not only overwintering honeybees, but was a big proponent of it, and was actually had this goal to try to use the overwintered hives he had to breed more queens and then disperse those out to other people and try to make a better genetic for Alaska. And I always try to, you know, give him credit for that, because he was kind of the first, at least as far as I knew of. And so a lot of this is so new, and, you know, but more and more people are getting on board. Tim is new, but he's a really smart dude, and he's good at keeping records, and, you know, I like him. We run that club together, and I'm not good at that kind of stuff, so I'm happy to have him. So your turn, Tim.
Did you have any follow-up questions for Nathan on what he just said before I chime in?
No, go right ahead.
So I have a lot of conversations with non-Alaska people on a couple of different beekeeping sites, and they're always quick to point out that cold is not the issue, which I don't disagree with, but it's the sheer duration of our winters that are the challenge. So the last pollen is available in August. The next pollen is available in late March if the weather's good. And so the weather good meaning in the mid-40s. And our bees are flying in the mid-40s. Hopefully you have a nice sunny spot where there's a little ambient temperature gain against a tree line is really good. And when was our first flowers, Nathan? Those dandelions this year, it got cold again. It was May, wasn't it?
Yeah, the dandelions came pretty late. Our tree pollen came pretty early, like the willows. They were putting out pollen like back in the third week of March. I think some people might have even said a little bit earlier than that. So I was excited, man. I was out there taking pictures and videos, and I was like, man, you know, everything's going to be different now, you know. But then all of a sudden, yeah.
Winter came back.
Yeah.
Winter came back for a good 5 weeks.
Yeah.
So our first nectar was dandelion nectar, and that's May, and you don't have any other flowers at all until at least the third week of May, and more like the very last of May and 1st of June. So it's really just a very short season. So just trying to figure out a way to get them supplemental sugar syrup when they need it, and having enough stores going into winter. It's just a real challenge, and the whole, of course, with that long winter, it brings in how you're going to ventilate them. Are you going to use an upper entrance, only a lower entrance? And, you know, the 10,000 theories on ventilation that are out there.
So if I were going to design a bee to do well in Alaska, I'm just gonna throw some stuff out there. You tell me if you agree or disagree.
Can I just, hey, Solomon, let me just say something real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because it relates directly to what you're about to say. You asked where we get the bees, and Nathan said packages. But he also touched a little bit on Keith's breeding program, which Keith takes queens that have successfully made it through 2 winters and ships them south to be mated during the winter, so that we have survivor stock descendants available for our queens in the spring. But we also try to get different survivor stock as well. And so the packages we get are from a number of different places. And there are some Troy Hawk queen daughters that come from where, Nathan?
Vermont. New England. Oh, Vermont.
Yeah. And then there's Russians and Carniolans. And so one of our dilemmas is that so many people that just kill their bees in the fall, they get Italians because they're so prolific. And Italians do not overwinter well in our climate. And so open mating, it's just problematic to try to retain the genetics of bees that are doing well with overwintering. So I thought I'd give you the background about telling you what bees we have, and you were going to tell us how you were going to build our bee of the future. I'm very interested in it.
Well, I wish I knew how to build bees, but I'm just gonna have some hypotheses. So
Okay.
It would seem to me that you'd want bees that collect a lot of pollen because they're going to need that. You would want them to be pretty frugal in keeping stores overwintering with maybe a relatively small cluster. You'd want explosive brood up in the spring at the right time, which might be difficult. And of course you'd want massive honey production. Does that sound about right?
I'll take it.
Well, that's where Nathan and I are a little different, because Nathan wants to rely on honey production because he sells it at his store. To me, honey production would be awesome, but mostly I'm in it because the bees are so fascinating to have. So
I'm in it for both.
Yeah. So
Both.
I have a little more leeway, but I am looking forward to seeing some of my overwinter colonies produce some honey, because I didn't harvest any honey the first year off of any of those, and I don't know. In the classes Nathan teaches, people always want honey the first year. He always goes, "Oh well, I guess you could take a frame of honey. It might not hurt, but I wouldn't."
Honey's like the vibe. The way I look at it, and I got to give Keith the credit for this, but he says, the bees are the resource and the honey is the byproduct. It doesn't matter what kind of honey bees you have; they're all going to produce honey. So if you are successful in raising bees, you're going to have honey. So that's kind of how I look at it, But I would probably do the bees even without the honey, because I'm addicted as well.
Yeah, Keith's got a lot of those pithy sayings.
Yeah. He's a saying machine, that guy.
So right now, today as we record, it is June 10th, and I actually have our spring came about a month late. We're just now getting blackberry blossoms, which should have happened a month ago. But then it went straight into our very high temperatures, which normally wouldn't be around till July. So as I'm looking at the thermometer right now outside, it is 98 degrees and has been all afternoon.
Ay.
Yeah, so it's pretty warm. So I could go for 70 right now.
Yeah.
So where are bees in their where your colony development where you are now, Solomon, in terms of when you could have started producing queens or splitting?
Well, depending on the year, here it's starting in early April would be really good. Excuse me. But this year it's been, like I said, everything's late. The morel mushroom crop was a month late, and then it got really hot, and so it just kind of disappeared. So it's an odd year. I've already done, I guess you could say, 2 rounds of splits. But I'm also just moved into a new property here next to the river, so I don't know how well the bees are going to do throughout the year, because I'm now surrounded by a lot of irrigated farmland, so it seems to me there's going to be some blossoms all throughout the summer, which isn't really something I've experienced before. But as far as beekeeping in general, I'm having a pretty good time right now because everything's kind of easy. It's warm in the daytime and cool at night, and plenty of flowers around.
Nice. So you said you're on your second round of splits already?
Yeah, I did one batch of splits, and then I just did another batch of splits. I didn't split the same ones twice. Or I didn't split
gotcha.
I didn't split the babies again.
Gotcha. Yeah, most people are just starting there. Like I'm doing one right now actually as we speak, but I think this year especially, most people are just now starting to get into that. I just saw the first swarm posted on Facebook a couple days ago, and of course I'm sure there was other ones too, but like my overwintered colonies are in 2 deep, and I'm putting the third box on right now, and splitting the ones that I probably should have put in the third box on already, and they're starting to make queen cells. So I never cut out queen cells. I figure if they're supersedure cells, they need them. If they're swarm cells, then I'm not going to try to come back every week and cut them out. I've never done. Actually, I tried that 1 year, but now I just figure it's time to split them and make increase off them. But folks that started with package bees, most of them are just now starting to put their second box on. I've already got a big swarm that moved into one of my dead outs from last, that died over the winter. I've already got a huge swarm that moved in there and is, packing those 2 deeps. I don't know which hive it came from, but I'm pretty sure it was one of mine. I don't know. I just like to touch on that because a lot of the reason that people don't overwinter is they're looking at the economics of it. But I have to spend $5,000 on bees, to replace all those hives. And not only that, the hives that I have that made it through the winter are just, they're booming. I do a top and a bottom entrance once they get up to more than 1 box. And they're pouring out of both of them on my overwintered colonies, So it's just, I wish more people could see that and see the difference.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about methods now. So top and bottom entrance. When I was up there, I stayed with, what was his name? John, yeah, that's right. And his hives were pretty basic top bottom entrance, and he also had polystyrene hives. Do you guys use those? Are those common?
Yeah, he got those for me.
Oh, great.
Yeah, that's one of my friends. But so one of the reasons like that I do the top entrance is we get so much snow that I never know if they're even going to be able to get into their bottom entrance. Even with putting them on 3 pallets, there's quite often so much snow that the bottom entrance gets buried, at least for a time. And, I've got my hives back on different farms, and sometimes it's really difficult to get back to them in the winter. So I try to set them up in a way that they can get in and out when they need to, even if there's a ton of snow. Plus the ventilation, Tim touched on that. We use most of us use screen bottom boards, at least folks that overwinter. And one of the reasons I do that is because as the snow melts, it tends to flood the bottom of the hive. But ventilation does seem to be a massive key for these hives. Also, the polystyrene hives, I did start with wooden hives, but I was getting a pretty small percentage of success, and then I got a couple of polystyrene hives. I think that might have been that might have been the first year, and those were the ones that made it. So the second year I got sick, and I just found that I was getting a lot better success with the polystyrene hives. So I think it's been 7 or 8 years now that I switched over 100% of my colonies to the polystyrene hives, and that seems to make a difference. Keeps them, I think the insulation's about 7 times better. They fit together really well, so there's not much as far as gaps in between the boxes and that kind of stuff. So, any little thing we can do to to help them to conserve energy, so they're not having to consume more food, which probably makes them need to do cleansing flights more often. Every little thing we can do to help them with that. I try to do that. And mouth guards.
Yes. So I knew from the beginning that I didn't want to kill my bees in the fall. So I was advised to start preparing for overwintering before I bought my first equipment. So I bought poly hives. And we had 2 long cold snaps this winter. And I went, it was my first year overwintering, and I was going out and looking at those hives all the time, maybe not every day, but a number of times a week. There's just one beautiful, cold, clear day. It was about 4 degrees, and it had been that cold. That was the high that day, was 4 degrees. And I went by and I looked in that upper entrance and just looked at it for a while, and I saw a couple of bees just crawling around on the inside there, and I thought, that poly is doing its job. Because I know that if they were tightly clustered, I would not see random bees crawling around outside the cluster.
So I imagine the bees don't get cleansing flights throughout a good portion of the winter.
Did you say they don't?
Yeah, I'm guessing. Is that accurate?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I would say that's pretty accurate. There's, like Tim was saying, when we get a cold snap below zero, especially for 2 or 3 weeks, and I was actually out of state during that major one, but you can't hardly see anything. In fact, one of the ways I can try to get an idea of who's still alive is the hives that are still alive will have all these condensation crystals hanging off the top entrance, from the perspiration, from the bees perspiring moisture. But yeah, I would say sometimes there's a couple of months long that they can't come out. And then it'll get up to, say, 20 degrees, and you'll see thousands of bees coming out, and dead bees all over the snow, and yellow spots all over the snow. And I'll get a bunch of messages and pictures and stuff. Oh my gosh, I saw hundreds of dead bees in front of my hive this morning. And I'm like, yes, that's great. That means the hive is still alive. So be thankful.
Yeah, I think that I actually tried to track it, and I looked for days that I thought should be warm enough for cleansing flights. And I did not. So I saw this Michael Palmer video where he goes, "Oh, they flew today and the snow was covered with yellow." And I just didn't see that until late March. And so I was, the only bees I saw fly out, I never saw come back from November until mid-March, early March maybe. Early March when it started warming up here. And then I saw a bee come back, and I was so excited.
Yeah, I wonder sometimes. I see so many bees dead outside the hive, and I do see them fly out and they'll land on the snow, and of course they're so tiny they just get cold in a few seconds, and there's no going back. And it definitely makes me wonder how the heck there's still a hive there in the spring, but they make it somehow. I imagine a lot more come back than we realize. They must be, because that's the only way they would survive.
Nathan Solomon asked about methods, and why don't you talk about when you harvest the honey on the calendar, and then the rapid feeding you do in the fall, for how long and why you stop when you do.
Okay. So of course, just to give you a quick calendar, when the bees start coming out of winter, the overwintered colonies usually don't need a lot of feed because I leave them a lot. But the package bees will need feed, and of course frames of honey is best if that's what you have. But basically I usually harvest the honey the very first week of August. And I don't take anything from the bottom 2 boxes. I used to take a little bit from down there, but I leave everything in the bottom 2 deeps for the bees. So sometimes, of course, you don't take anything from a hive, but whatever's above that, that's in the mediums, that's what I'll take. And I try to get that done as early as possible. Some people will try to leave their honey supers on later, hoping that they're going to, get another flow from clover or, who knows what. But yeah, I try to take them as early as possible. And when I do take the honey, I put an insulated inner cover back on. And of course, when I take the honey, it's a good time to do a little, health check on the hive and make sure they're queen right, make sure everything's good to go. And that's actually the last time I will remove the inner cover until the following year. So, like I said, I use an insulated inner cover, and as soon as I take the honey, I actually have feed ready to go. So I go ahead and put some feed on them right then and there. It's a little 1.5 gallon rapid top feeder. And I basically feed them usually till the end of August. Sometimes, into September, but I try to do most of it in August so that they have plenty of time to reduce whatever amount of feed they've taken in, to reduce that feed down to that, correct, moisture content, because I don't want them going into winter with, basically uncapped cells of food of any kind that's going to ferment or that's going to put off all kinds of moisture. So that actually seems to me to be really important, is people tend to feed their bees way too late up here. So yeah, I try not to do it any longer than is absolutely necessary. And usually I'm done by the first week of September, which I feel like gives them plenty of time to reduce that feed down to that 16-17% moisture content that they can cap. So then it becomes a moisture absorber, or it becomes hygroscopic. Instead of putting off moisture, it can actually absorb some of the moisture in the hive.
So would you say that feeding is necessary always?
Yeah, either that or you leave them all, or you don't take any honey.
Okay, but I'm not making any judgments. I'm just asking questions.
Sure. I mean, I think it can be done if you don't harvest any honey or harvest very, very little, But as these colonies mature over the seasons, I do find that they need less and less and less feeding in the fall.
That's good news.
Yeah.
Have you ever tried feeding granulated sugar?
I have a little bit. I think Tim did a lot of that last year. But I've either always fed kind of like a fondant, just water and sugar mixed together, or a sugar brick. But I think Tim did a bit of that last year. I don't think I've ever done just plain granulated sugar, but.
Well, I tried a number of things last year going into my first winter and really wanted to get them through. I just read everything I could and then closed my eyes and threw a dart at the options. And I ended up putting a candy board on 4 of them. And just because I know that what Nathan does is he gets into the colonies in February usually to check their stores and give them that sugar brick if he needs to. And I thought, why not just, give them the sugar in advance and then not have to open them up when it might be really bad weather. And I tried a moisture board on 1. And that, that just was a complete and utter fail. Those bees died fast, and it was wet in there. But it was just really wet. Everything was really wet. And so I believe what happened was the candy board, that hard candy, acted. It also absorbed some moisture. But I will say this, that when I got into those colonies in the spring, those inner covers were just as dry as a bone. I mean, it was just great. I think it's because there were enough bees that they were keeping the temperature such that any condensation that occurred happened on the sides of the hive where it wasn't dripping down on them and bothering them. I also added extra insulation to the top. They're already in poly hives, but I figured heat rises, so I added another inch of foam board on top. It just made sense to me that if you don't want the moisture to condense above their heads and make that the warmest part of the hive. Nathan says he doesn't do that, but I also know that he uses 2-inch foam insulation as an outer cover on a bunch of his colonies. So he actually does add insulation on all those colonies above.
Yeah, just kind of by accident. But if I could just say something real quick. So I actually don't break into the inner cover in February. I take the main lid off, and my inner covers are insulated with Reflectix as well. On the bottom, on the underside, it's kind of the deeper side of that particular inner cover. And so basically what I do is I test the weight of the hive. I look at, are all the bees up at the very top? And so basically I just take the telescoping lid off, look through the hole in the inner cover, and then I'll put literally a brick of sugar on that covers the hole in the inner cover, so it kind of helps maintain that insulation, and then put an extra box on and a lid on top of that. And they usually don't eat much of it though, so I actually didn't do that last year. Or maybe I did it on a couple, but for the most part, they didn't need it. So I'm trying to get to the point where... Sorry, go ahead, Tim.
I was just going to say, mine didn't need it either. I mean, when I got in there finally, they had plenty of capped sugar syrup honey available to them. So they got up there and they ate that, but they didn't need it from a resource perspective. It was just me fretting over my first winter, I think.
Yeah, I literally fed out of 22 colonies, or 23 colonies, 19 of which were overwintered hives. I fed like 50 pounds of sugar. Like, that's how much sugar I went through with all those colonies this spring. Son of a... Ouch. Sorry.
Did you get stung?
Yeah. Right in the neck. Yeah. I'm in the field. Damn, right in the neck, man.
Well, what other tips and tricks do you think you have that could help beekeepers in Alaska, or maybe beekeepers in Colorado who are up in the mountains, just anybody in a cold environment?
Well, for me in particular, I definitely would recommend staying away from bees like buckfast, Italians, unless you're getting them from somewhere that is, like they've been overwintered outside in a cold climate, and I would try to, people like to feed pollen replacement, and I'm not judging anybody, whatever they got to do to be successful, but if you can feed them some kind of mixture with real pollen in it, it seems to help, and I think getting those insulated hives is a good way to go. The warmer they can stay in the beginning, the more the cluster can spread out, and the less food they're going to have to consume just to maintain their heat. Little things like that seem to make a big difference. But I think genetics might be the most important thing. You touched on a type of bee that's frugal, that winters over in a smaller cluster, and to me that's Russian bees. I've read that about Caucasians, but I've only had the opportunity to use them a few times. I really think Russian bees are probably the best for colder weather climates, higher elevations, and also there's this thing these days about, the single brood box method. And I just think that's a terrible idea. It's like putting a plant in a little tiny pot, if you want to get a healthy colony, I feel like they need to be big, and to have a strong immune system and maintain the right temperature and humidity and all that. So I don't see how you can do that in just one box. And also patience about allowing them to build up that first season and leaving, and if you can control yourself, don't take any of the honey, at least leave them 2 big boxes. What do you do down there in Oregon? How many boxes do you winter over on?
I usually do at least 2, usually more, but hives here can, a well-apportioned single deep can survive the winter no problem here. We don't have, I have a fairly mild winter, though it is wet and moist. So as long as you have as long as you have ventilation taken care of, you have a good solid lid that keeps water out. The bees, a single deep will usually do it.
Yeah, I've actually wintered over in 6-frame nukes as well. Oh, that's another thing too, is I think everybody should get into, making their own splits. And I like to do that into 6-frame nukes because then I can stack 2 of them on top of each other. And they seem to do just as well, maybe even a little bit better with the 2 6-frames on top of each other, just based on the way they like to move vertically. Plus, I just like those little 6-frame nukes because I can move them around to different places a little easier. But it doesn't have to be a nuke, I guess. But just people should get into making their own splits. It allows the colony to make their own queen, which I think 90% of the time at least, that a queen that the hive makes on their own is going to be better than the one you purchased, unless of course you started with a swarm. But that seems to be something people are almost afraid of, is like, queen cell, I got to chop it out of there. I had a guy call me today, if he's listening, you're the man. But anyway, he called me today and he said, I found a virgin queen and I can't find my marked queen. And I said, well, what did you do with her? I put her in a cage because I don't think she's mated. Well, how's she going to get mated then? If she's not mated, you put her in a cage. But, people got to stop being so scared of those queen cells, man. The worst thing could happen is if you lose a swarm, and, so what, but that's kind of almost a phobia. People need to learn to read that and understand that there's a lot of different reasons they're making queen cells at different times of year. And, it's for a reason, and it's a lot easier and a lot better in the long run to just work with them than to try to fight those instincts,
Speaking of splits, how do you do your splits? What time of year? You said 6-frame nukes. Can you get into a little bit more detail?
Yeah, absolutely. Like what I'm doing right now is basically I'm taking this overwintered colony that I don't want to make it real small because Tim and I were going to breed some queens off of it because this has survived 3 years. So this will be the 4th. And I haven't had one survive the 4th because I'm always donating the queens to Keith in the fall, But, so I don't want to take too much from it, but it's going to swarm if I don't. And I'd rather make a split off of it than have a high probability of losing the swarm. So basically what I do with this one, I'll take 2 or 3 frames of capped brood, like the thickest frames I can find of capped brood, and put them in that nuke. And I'll find the queen as well and put her in that nuke. Whatever frame she's on will go in there. And then I'll take a frame of honey and a frame of pollen, and I'll put that in a 6-frame nuke. And I'll usually move it, to a different location so that I don't have a ton of the bees drifting to there because the queen's in there now. So, because I used to put them right next door. But yeah, usually I use a 6-frame nuke, 2 or 3 frames of capped brood, a frame of honey, a frame of pollen, and whatever frame the queen's on, I'll usually have seed on it as well. And move that to a different area of the bee yard. And not leaving all the open brood in the main colony there allows them to make their new queen. Sometimes they're already making queen cells, of course. And the reason I do the cap brood is because they generate their own heat. They're not going to require a bunch of food until they start emerging. And being that so many of the adults are going to go back to the main colony, that ensures that they should have a good population. I used to do it in late June or early July, but I've only been getting about a 50% success getting those nukes through the winter, and I'd like to get that up to 60-70%. So, especially, well, there's that, and also these hives are getting so big so early, as you know, they've made it through so many winters. They're just mature colonies, I guess. But I got to split them early, or they're going to swarm, and I usually don't catch them when they swarm. You know, my apiaries aren't at my home, so I can, and the vegetation's so thick that it's pretty unusual for me to find a swarm from my own yard. And then another thing that Tim and I had talked about is when I'm harvesting honey, if that nuke is not taken off like I think it should, I can always steal some more brood or some more, you know, whatever. I can steal from the main colony and strengthen them up a bit so that they can at least fill up 2 of those 6-frame boxes, you know. And I broke my ribs last year, so I was only able to do 2, but they both made it through the winter. And one of them I did for a little class I was having, and that was pretty cool because I could actually show all the people that were at the class, hey, here's the slit we made, and here it is. It's still alive. And I just put I transferred them into a 10-frame box, and I just put the second box on it, and the main hive survived. So that was pretty cool. And those nukes that I use, they're also made out of high-density polystyrene. They're also screen bottom boards, and then I drill a hole in the top to give them a top entrance as well.
Tim, you do basically the same thing?
Well, I'm hoping to. I keep thinking mine are almost big enough to split, and I get into them, and they're just not quite there yet. I think that they built up so awesomely in late March, and then winter came again, and they hit pause. So I'm planning on doing the same thing. I'll say this. You were asking about tips. I actually have a couple of tips. First one is find somebody who's successfully overwintered near you and copy all their stuff. I mean, the reason why I overwintered 3 hives is not because I'm brilliant. It's because I copied the methods of people that were successfully doing it.
I absolutely agree. That's one of my top tips.
Yeah. Nice. And the other thing is that new beekeepers just have to be patient. And when you start with no drawn comb, everything happens in slow motion. And, you know, I've got 8 hives now. And one of the reasons why I wanted that many this year is because I wanted to get a ton of drawn comb. And so that I don't have to worry about drawn comb again. When I talk to Nathan about, you know, beekeeping problems or some other people, and they'll give me these solutions that work great if you have a ton of equipment and drawn comb available. But it just takes time, and it takes time for them to build up. And so anyway, I will do my splits that way this year, and I am optimistic that I am going to have reasonable success. I'm working with Nathan on trying to be brave on a number of fronts, like trying to graft this year, and trying to some other queen techniques, you know, backyard beekeeping techniques that if we get good at them, we can share with the club, and also try and figure out ways to strengthen those smaller colonies in the fall to improve our overwintering success, so that we can become less dependent on supplementing our apiaries with packages every year.
Yeah. So can I just, before I forget to say this too, you know, there is a club up here. It's for, you know, we started the Midnight Sun Bee Club, and that is a club. Of course, I'm not very objective, of course, because that's our club, but we started that club because we wanted a club that focused on overwintering honeybees, treatment-free beekeeping, So I just wanted to shout out to Midnight Sun Bee Club. That's what it's.
Midnight Sun Bee Club. Everybody got that?
Yep. Nothing against the other ones, but you know.
I'm wondering now how many listeners I get from Alaska. It's probably like 4.
Well, you're going to get a few more now because we're going to tell everybody about it.
Awesome. Well, I believe you guys have a bee meeting to go to this evening, so I don't want to keep you for too long. Is there any way? Yeah, Midnight Sun Bee Club. Is there a website or any of your information you want to get out to let people get a hold of you?
Definitely. We have a Facebook page, Midnight Sun Bee Club, the Midnight Sun Bee Club forum. You can also contact me at my shop in Eagle River at Regeneration Nutrition, and I'm sure we'll be getting a website soon enough. But at this point, we just have the Facebook page, or you can call 907-227-5665. That's my number. I'm the president. Tim is the vice president. I don't actually know his phone number. It's just under Tim. But, yeah, hit us up. And we meet every month on the second Monday of the month. After today, it'll be at the Matsu UAF Experimental Farm and Cooperative Extension Office. And we've actually got some hives there now, too. So that's pretty cool.
Tim, you want anybody to get a hold of you, or?
Well, I'll say this. My name is Tim Huffman, and there's a treatment-free beekeeper in Florida named Tim Huffman. It's not me. He's very experienced and has much better climate, and he's really good at catching swarms and posting videos constantly. If people want to get in touch with me, they can do that. I'm 907-223-4270.
Great, and you're both on the Treatment Free Beekeeping Facebook page, I believe?
Yes, sir.
All right, well, we will continue to see you there, and I thank you very much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Solomon. It's been a blast.
And there you go. That's how it works. That's a podcast recording from beginning to end. I only cut out a few seconds of silence here and there. Yeah, this has been the Treatment Free Beekeeping Podcast. If you'd like to support the podcast, I have a Patreon page. You can check that out. I also have, if you're interested in watching YouTube videos, a bunch of YouTube videos. Come on, cat. I'll explain that in a minute. Yeah, a bunch of YouTube videos. I've got over 110 now, a lot of them from me and other beekeeping teachers and speakers and things. You can learn new methods, learn new philosophies. A lot of great videos. Check those out. Those are for your education. I'm sorry about if you had any background noise. This is the first time that I've recorded at the new house that we bought. It's not actually new. It's actually 40 years old, but this is the first new episode from there, and I have a cat. Come here, cat. We have a cat now. 2 cats, actually, but the other one doesn't purr. And we have baby chickens in the background there. You might have heard peeping from time to time. So, I think I'm going to have to build like a little recording booth or something, because I can definitely hear the road noise out front in the front yard too. So thank you for listening. Thank you for ignoring any audio technical issues, and I will see you in the next episode.